I did not hear from my daughter for 2 weeks.
So you only found out about her arrest when they came with search warrants?
She's been in prison 7 months without trial. They're calling this an enforced disappearance.
Do you get the sense your daughter is being made an example of?
This is political. The point is, don't mess with the politics of how our country is arming Israel.
Today I'm talking to Clare Hinchcliffe, mother of 21-year-old Zoe Rogers, a young woman arrested for taking part in direct action at a weapons factory belonging to Israeli defense firm 18's Systems near Bristol, where activists drove a van onto the premises and damaged machinery inside. 18's Systems is known to produce weapons used in Israel's wars on Gaza and elsewhere. Zoe was denied bail and has been held in jail since August 2024 because of claims she may have links to terrorism, despite the fact she is not facing terror-related charges. She is among several others arrested for their participation, known as the Filton 18, many also denied bail and held in jail since then. Last week, a protester climbed the Big Ben in London and called to free the Filton 18, brandishing a pro-Palestine flag. Clare, thank you so much for coming to speak to Middle East Eye. I realise how fraught it must be to discuss this topic, and our thoughts are, of course, all with you. What was your reaction when you saw that this protester, this random individual, had climbed the Big Ben in the middle of London and called to free the Filton 18, of which, of course, your daughter is one?
I was just like, oh my word. I was absolutely blown away. I was shopping with my younger daughter. So I was standing in a shop looking at my phone, seeing this man climbing Big Ben with bare feet, holding a Palestine flag, shouting, "Free the Filton 18, free Palestine." And I just couldn't believe it. I was, what a hero, what a brave man to do that. And I was so surprised. I bumped into another shopper, and my younger daughter was like, "Mum," it's so embarrassing.
Obviously, your daughter being held since August, it's a long time to go through this thing, and at times it can feel, I imagine, lonely and almost as if the world is not keeping track of her case.
Yeah, so to have it highlighted like that, it shows how much people really care, and how much all the people who care about Palestine have been protesting and seeing their hearts are really with us, and that was a lovely way to see it so publicly.
It kind of brought your daughter and all of the rest of the Filton 18 back into the limelight. Your daughter, I imagine, has been involved in pro-Palestine activism for quite a while. Do you know how she first got involved, how she was first drawn to the cause?
Really just watching on Instagram, watching a live stream genocide, like so many people her age, it was just in their faces, and it was desperate, that feeling of I need to do something. She was also studying at college. She was studying history, she was looking at Palestine and Israel. She's very widely read, and so the injustice for her was just unbearable, and so she started going to all the marches really early on. She had a turning point where she bought a giant white bed sheet, and she was going to write all the names of the children who'd been killed so far, which was then about 2,000 children's names. And she just never wrote a single one. She got so depressed, she went back to bed for the weekend. And I think that was a point where she's like, I need to do something that makes a difference. The government's not listening to all these hundreds of thousands of people. Unknown to me, she joined Palestine Action. And she did tell me direct action is the only thing that's going to make a difference. She said, "Mum, the marches aren't working. Direct action is about actually making change, going to the source of the problem, which is the weapons factories in this country."
When she joined other protesters in direct action on the 18's Systems weapons factory in Bristol, you said you didn't know before. How did you learn what had happened?
So the first I knew was 4 police officers on my doorstep early one morning with a warrant to search her bedroom, and the news that she was under arrest in a police station in Bristol.
Oh, so you only found out about her arrest when they came with search warrants to your home. And had you been able to contact her?
So the first shock was the 4 police officers. The second shock was not getting any phone call from her. So they said to me, "Oh, within about 24 hours you should be hearing from her." I didn't hear from her that day, or the next day, or the next day, or the next day. And so by that time, they had been rearrested in the middle of the night under the Terrorism Act, and they were effectively disappeared. They had no right to contact anyone from the outside. No one would have known where they were if it hadn't been for Palestine Action making inquiries for us. Wow. They were disappeared.
So you weren't given any reason why you weren't able to hear from her?
I did not hear from my daughter for 2 weeks. She was kept in solitary for 6 days, interrogated day and night, no right to make any phone calls, and it was another week before she was allowed to make a phone call because of the high security, and this is all to do with the counter-terror powers.
When did you see her for the first time after
in
her
court.
arrest?
So I saw her through 2 layers of security glass, and I got to see the judge saying no bail to all of them, which was a deeply traumatic moment. There was no reason why she shouldn't have bail. She's good character, no previous offences, no reason not to adhere to bail conditions. The judge just said no to all of them.
How did that feel, that moment of hearing she was denied bail after not even being able to speak to her?
It was awful. I mean, I really made a scene. I was sobbing. It was gut-wrenching, like just watching your child being led away in handcuffs. There's no way of describing that feeling.
You mentioned that she was denied bail along with several others, despite the fact that they met all the conditions for bail. Why do you think that was then? We're talking about many of them 20, 21 years old. What could have been the reason?
Many of these were young women starting out at university or recent graduates. My daughter should have been starting university that September. This is all about the so-called terrorism connection. It was alleged to be a terrorist offence, even though they were charged with ordinary criminal offences.
They alleged a terrorism connection despite the fact they were not facing terrorism charges.
Exactly.
Okay.
So the counter-terrorism police are in charge of this investigation, and that's why you had counter-terrorism police rounding up people around the country in connection with this case. Up to 30 officers bashing doors down, breaking windows, putting family members' children in handcuffs while they violently arrested their loved ones. It's insane.
And the fact, obviously, that this is being dealt with by counter-terrorism police as opposed to usual police, I imagine allows for a different way of doing things. How has that changed the procedures of her case?
It's changed everything. She's been in prison 7 months without trial. 6 months is the custody time limit without trial, and the prosecution are extending it, and they will continue to extend it. She will not get to trial for 15 months after she was arrested. So all of that is a massive attack on their human rights. They're treated as high security prisoners.
What does that mean for the restrictions they face in prison?
For one example, they were given a non-association order. Originally there were 6 women in Bronzefield prison, where my daughter still is, and they were not allowed to associate in any way with each other. My daughter was kept in the induction wing. Her mental health was just spiralling downwards. For the first 2 months they kept her there.
We know that UN rapporteurs have also commented on this, on the significant deterioration in their mental health, on what it believes is the improper use of a terrorist connection to impose undue restrictions. What did the UN find, and what have they said about their treatment?
The fact that the UN have intervened at all is really significant to us. I mean, it shows what a milestone this is in the government's acts of repression. They talked about the fact that in international good practice, terrorism isn't defined as something as minor as damaging property. That shouldn't be defined as terrorism in international good practice. But in the UK, the definition of terrorism is way too broad. And the government was challenged on that back in 2003, and they've never acted on it. And now they're abusing the vagueness of that definition to their own ends.
So the UK's scope of terrorism laws is actually more repressive and broad than the international standard.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they can take something that is the damage of property, which is what Palestine Action does, and they can call that terrorism, or say there has a terrorism connection. So that's deeply worrying. That came up in the UN report. The other thing, among many that came up, was the fact that they were detained under the Terrorism Act, even though they ultimately weren't charged with terrorism charges. And that detention for 6 days in solitary confinement with no right to make calls to loved ones, that deeply concerned the UN, and one of the authors of the report is the Working Party on Enforced Disappearances. They're calling this an enforced disappearance, and for that to happen in my country shocks me more than I can express.
That's shocking, both that something like property damage can be treated as terrorism and then used as a case for enforced disappearance, solitary confinement. What was the UK government's response to those allegations?
It was really dismissive. They basically said, we can't discuss a live case. But it wasn't about the case, it was about the arrest, it was about the use of counter-terror powers. That absolutely should have been discussed and responded to, but they just battered it aside.
What do you think that says about the state of human rights in the UK if they're willing to just kind of ignore UN?
It's terrifying. The state of human rights is terrifying. It's a wake-up call. We should treat the Filton 18 case as a wake-up call for our democracy and our human rights across the country, whether it's Palestine, climate, or advocating for vulnerable people in society, or trade unions. This affects all of us.
You use the term political prisoners. Do you get the sense that your daughter is being, among others, made an example of? Do you think there's a point to the treatment of these young women?
Yeah, 1000%, yes. This is political. The point is, don't mess with Elbit Systems. It's the biggest Israeli weapons firm. Don't mess with the politics of how our country is arming Israel. That's the message, and it's come from meetings that we know about between the Israeli ambassador and the government and the CEO of Elbit Systems UK.
You're referencing the Freedom of Information Act,
yes.
Filed by Palestine Action,
yes.
which showed that prior to the 7th of October, the then Home Secretary Priti Patel, the Israeli ambassador and Elbit CEO, had met promising to crack down on those
yes.
who vandalized.
So the groundwork was laid by the previous government,
mm-hmm.
and then you also had the Lord Woolney report, which recommended treating Palestine Action as terrorism light. You can't prescribe them because they're not terrorists, but you can treat them like terrorists. That was his recommendation. And this is a man who is in the pay of arms firms. Those recommendations were carried out to the letter by this new government. There's no change, it's got worse.
Do you see this as an increasingly cynical and political use of counter-terrorism laws, not just against Palestine activists, but climate activists,
mm-hmm.
protesters in the UK more broadly?
This is a real turning point in our history, and we need to wake up to what's happening here. It feels like we are sleepwalking into a police state, and what's happening with the Filton 18 is a milestone on that journey. It's a massive step towards repression. We all need to be aware this isn't just about Palestine, it's about everyone's rights to freedom of expression, to dissent, or we're going to wake up in a country where you disagree with this government and you go to prison.
We've been talking more specifically about your daughter's case and Palestine Action, but we've also seen kind of legal crackdowns used on pro-Palestine marches, notably in late January, the Columbia graduate Mahmoud Khalil, the government attempting to deport him, anything from immigration laws to public order offences being thrown here at the right to protest. What do you think this means for young people and university students who have really been at the forefront of protests and activism? Is there a chilling effect?
The UN has intervened in the Filton 18 case, and those were their exact words, that it's chilling, it's having a chilling effect, it's trying to deter legitimate protests and activism. For young people, this is a hugely dangerous time. We're seeing people suspended from university for speaking out, but it's also a time where young people are so inspiring and so brave, rising to that challenge. It's not just my daughter. I've spoken to other Palestine activists who say they would rather go to prison than see another child killed and do nothing. I just take my hat off to them, that they are willing to be arrested, to take a stand. And I think this whole atmosphere of repression across the world, especially in this country, is raising up some real heroes, literally throwing themselves bodily into Keir Starmer's war machine because they are so brave and so passionate that they will just risk their own selves, their own bodies.
And I know you said this is about everyone, this isn't just about individuals, but obviously your daughter is just 21, and I'm sure she had study plans and future plans and plans of her own, and yet now she may not be released until November, detained for 15 months. How has this disrupted her ambitions?
Well, Zoe worked very hard to get a place at university. She did an extra year of sixth form because of COVID interrupted her A-levels, so she did another year. Then she didn't get the A-levels that she wanted for her university of choice, so she did another year of studies and she got a place. Fortunately, that's been deferred for 2 years, so she might take up that place, but she might not, because November is just the start of her trial. The trial will go on for more than 2 months. She might be sentenced. We don't know. She's sacrificing her education, potentially. On the other hand, she's easy in her conscience, knowing that she's taken action on something that she believes so passionately in. And she told me the other day, I said, Zoe, you seem really strong at the moment, you seem really cheerful, you're really kind of standing firm. And she said, yes, Mum, I feel free internally. And that was a lovely thing to hear. And I'm so inspired by her. And, you know, she's changed my life. Her cause has become my cause. If this is what it takes, you know, the pain I'm going through, the grief of separation from her, the anxiety about her, the disruption to my daily life, if that's what it takes to stand up to a genocide, then I'm with her.
I understand that you've written a poem about your daughter's detention in prison and about the situation. If you wanted to recite it, you'd be most welcome.
So I was so inspired by that man who climbed Big Ben in his bare feet with a Palestine flag, and I wrote a poem. For the man who climbs Big Ben with a Palestine flag. Parliament is conquered. 1,000 years of squatting by the Thames, seeing off all comers, hanging authors of gunpowder plots, and now this, overthrown by just one man who isn't even wearing shoes. He has conquered you. And now it's fluttering from your tower, the flag you tried hard not to see these 100 years, lifted up by just one man, with bloodied feet, pierced by our democracy, bleeding for the many sins committed by this government. Except they do know what they do. There's no excuse. Just yards from here stood Balfour, promising away the land, and for every crime that's happened since, some blood belongs on British hands. For just one day, the flag is in its rightful place, and all the traffic stopped across the river and around the square is as it should be, to pay respect to those who suffer crimes against humanity. Take this moment, nail it to your mind, because when you finally come down, it will not be to safety, but to handcuffs and a prison cell. Welcome to our judiciary. But we are also waiting here. We, the family and friends of the Filton 18 prisoners of hope, and all the rest imprisoned for their stand. Here at the jagged underside of justice, we wait for you with open arms.
That's really moving. Thank you.
Thank you.